All right, so as we move into our next section for this evening, we are going to revisit some of those concepts from 2 weeks ago. And first, I'd like you to take a look at this quote, because I think it's very pertinent to what we're doing here. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. Absolutely. And if you think of learning and assessment, absolutely, any road will take you there. If you don't know where you're going, very important to know where you're going with instruction and with assessment. They definitely tie together. And it's very important that your assessment have a purpose. So why are you assessing students at this point in time and on these standards? Assessment is a key piece of curriculum and instruction. We always talk about CIA, curriculum, instruction, and assessment. That assessment is important because it gives you feedback on your teaching. It also gives you feedback on students' learning, but it gives feedback to the students on how they're doing with their learning over time. And so assessment really has a lot of different purposes. And so you have to define what that purpose is going to be before you actually give that assessment and as you're developing it. The feedback system is really like your home heating and cooling system. Now this time of year, it could go either way. I talked to my dad yesterday. He's outside in Nashville. He's like, yeah, it's 80 degrees outside today. I said, what? And we had that cold, windy day yesterday. However, today it's gorgeous outside. So your learning target, what you're trying to reach is that desired temperature. Okay? And so your teaching and learning is your home heating or cooling system. It's that vehicle by which you get those students to understand or reach the knowledge they need to know with that learning target. And then your actual temperature is those test results. So as a result of your teaching and learning, what do those results look like? And then that feeds back into that system of teaching and learning. That test results, assessment results, definitely influence instruction in the classroom. Where you want to go, your learning target, is that foundation for instruction and assessment. Because again, if you don't know where you're going, how are you going to get there? And so as you create your assessments, we're beyond just our single test items right now. We're thinking about your assessment as a whole. It's important that you really think about that alignment with instruction. There are some districts that have common assessments, and they're district-wide common assessments. Everybody has to use them. And teachers wonder, well, my students didn't do very well on those. I wonder why that is. And then we go over the instruction that occurred in the classroom during that unit. That instruction did not align with that assessment, with the learning targets that were on that assessment. The teacher did what they thought they should teach instead of allowing those learning targets to drive instruction and having that alignment between the learning targets, the instruction, and the assessment. And so you can give a common assessment and not get the results you're looking for because the instruction wasn't aligned. So again, we talked about learning targets last time. And you have your standards, whether you're looking at your Common Core standards, the social studies standards, the next generation science standards. And you're defining those learning targets, you're deconstructing those standards. What is it that students need to be able to do? And we often write those in the student-friendly language of the I can statements. And then you're making that decision about what is it that is a priority. What's important for those students and which of those targets have the high leverage. And those were the items we talked about last time around how do you select which learning targets to assess and ultimately which ones to teach. Again, last time, and Mark focused a lot of this in our last session on your complexity. Looking at the depths of knowledge that you're addressing through your assessment and making sure that you have identified for each of your items which depth of knowledge are we assessing and targeting with our questions. And that is some of the homework and the work that you've done already today. So what we're going to try to do is bring this all together tonight. So we have our standards, our learning targets, our depth of knowledge identified. Where do we go from here? Thinking about writing an assessment as a whole, there are things to consider. We talked about the purpose. But you also need to ask yourself, how are we going to administer this assessment? And that goes back to that target method match. Are we assessing targets with the appropriate method? How do you want to administer this assessment? Is it going to be performance-based, project-based, written, oral? How do you want to assess those standards? How are you going to score the assessment? Another important consideration. How do you know which questions are worth more than others? Are they all the same? Are they different? And then how are you going to use the results? It goes along with the purpose of the assessment. Why are you giving an assessment? But also, what are you going to do with those results? Because if you do nothing with those results, why are you giving the assessment? It's a good question. Are we giving it because we have to, because we're told to, or because it's useful to the teaching going on in the classroom and the learning of the student? And so thinking about what are we going to do with these results to move forward with instruction is definitely an important consideration. So take a few minutes at your table, talk with an elbow partner about the considerations for developing assessments and tying in those learning targets with your instruction in the classroom to make sure that you have alignment with that assessment. So just talk for a few minutes.